Hello to all my people, and if you're watching live, checking us out on YouTube, or listening on your favorite podcast provider, you are most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botched Bots and Share Shots. I'm your host, a chef by trade and a mark by choice. I am the Will Gray, and joining me tonight, hailing from the NY, he is a 24-year vet. He is the Monsta, Steve Mack. Steve, thanks for coming on and chatting about some wrestling with me, brother. How are you?
What's going on, Mr. Will? And I have one correction for you.
Sir.
Technically, I know a lot of people use the low-key definition of when we started because we started at the same time. But I consider all the training before that as part of the experience. So it's 26 years this past February that we started.
See, 26 years.
Yeah,
26 years. That's crazy. And
trust me, it's for me too.
We'll get there in a second. But like when you think about the longevity of what that means, one of my favorite things to do when we start this, it's kind of always my icebreaker with you guys when I bring you on. We talk about exposure. I always say I grew up in the tail end of the NWA days, late 80s, early 90s. I watched WCW become a thing. By the Attitude Era, WWF had made it all the way down here in the South to me, so I started watching that. What were you exposed to as a young wrestling fan?
So growing up in New York, that's a legit thing. Brooklyn. My grandfather lived in Bed-Stuy. I had cousins that lived in Coney Island. And Low-Ki and I were cousins, first cousins. So we grew up 10 blocks away from each other, and we were hardcore WWF fans. His dad, my uncle, put us onto that, and it just like went insane from there. We grew up around the time of Hulkamania and the birth of Hulkamania. So we both, we loved all of the classics, WWF, Macho Man, and, Jake the Snake, and, just all the craziness of the mid-early 80s WWF. But then we got exposed to WCW around the late 80s when we both got cable, and we were able to see TBS. And, you would see NWA every once in a while on our local channels, but it wasn't that often. But the one thing that I do remember was that I'm pretty sure it was Telemundo. They had a lot of the Puerto Rican wrestling. So we got exposed to Carlos Colon and WWC and all that good stuff, and even then, every once in a while, we would see, World Class. And, that was pretty dope, seeing the Von Erichs and just how insane, the Freebirds and Von Erichs were, and Iceman King Parsons. And then as, the 90s went on, we got exposed to what World Class became in Global Wrestling Federation, GWF, where, they had the guys like Booker T and Steve Austin and Mick Foley. And we got to, Eric Embry and just all those guys, Jack Victory. That was some of my favorite wrestling because it wasn't, I guess it's kind of like what today's indies are. Everybody was starting out and it wasn't clean. It wasn't crisp, but it was fun to watch, and I remember Hollywood John Tatum being one of my favorites because he would always have the greatest facials. And when I got to work with Missy Hyatt, I used to talk to her about him all the time. So guys like that, stuff like that was always my favorites. But then being that was the era of magazines, we got to read about Stampede and, a lot of the other companies around the world, New Japan, All Japan. And it was from the early mid-90s with the WCW exposure that we started picking up on a lot of Japanese wrestling. So, up until that point, that's leading right into around our start in 97. We were just watching everything that we could, but mostly WWF, WCW, New Japan, All Japan, and in ECW, of course.
You bring it up, and I'm going to go off the script for a second. When you talk about, your WCCWs and your Puerto Ricos, and you talk about all the different territories, looking at where indie wrestling is today, do you think there would be something to be said if the ultimate we, the collective we, figured out a way to get a governing body back over the massive universe that is indie wrestling? Do you think there's something to be said about that happening with a governing body to be back in charge?
Well, I think part of I'll look at a GCW, right? GCW right now is the top indie company in the United States. Easy to say that.
For sure.
And they're doing what I think would eventually be done anyway, which is take all the top talent whenever they go to whatever town and use them and spotlight them. And I feel like they're with a governing body. I don't think it would be that easy to get that talent the exposure because there's too much infighting. And with the explosion of the internet, that kind of made it a lot more difficult to keep people unaware of what's going on the West Coast if they're on the East Coast and vice versa. So, that was part of what made the NWA work, was that they didn't know what was going on in California or Japan or Mexico. And people were able to, oh man, he got hurt. Meanwhile, he was really working on the West Coast or, whatever it was. So, and I believe that's what kind of made the magic for the old school territories, was that there was that ability to roam. People forget about you for a hot minute, and then you come back 6 months, a year later, and you're hot again, and I think that's what really needs to happen. People stay in the same place over and over again, and nothing really refreshes. I think that's more of the thing that needs to happen.
Let's get into training a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of after we get through the exposure, we kind of get into that origin story. You have a historic line. You just mentioned your cousin is Low-Ki. You also trained a little bit with Homicide. Let's kind of go into the training side of it and how you decided, okay, I'm going to be a pro wrestler, like going into training. What was that process like for you?
So I'm going to go a little bit before we even started training. In high school, I went to Fort Hamilton High School in Brooklyn, and there was a lot of guys who ended up becoming wrestlers at some point. One of them was Lowlife Louis Ramos, who one day I was traveling to school, and on the back of a city bus in New York City, I saw a guy with a Hulkamania backpack. And he wore the Sandman's red, white, and blue Zubaz and a bandana. And I was like, I got to be friends with this dude. Because back then, the mid-early 90s, wrestling wasn't as, easily talked about as it is now. And you had the very select group of guys who were willing to talk openly and show their love for wrestling openly. And Louis was definitely one of those guys. And I became friends with Louis, and he knew Mace from the Christopher Street Connection, who I had known since the 5th grade. And so we all were friends, and we all were, hanging out and stuff. And then one day Louis and Mace had asked me if I'd be interested in going down to this church in Brooklyn. And they had a ring that they would rent, and they would film their stuff. And nobody was trained. It was just, if you break your neck, oh, it sucks to be you, kid. You know what I mean? But, they would tell me all this stuff, and they were filming and putting on public access TV in Brooklyn and Manhattan. And, I didn't think nothing of it. I was like, yeah, sure, it's a chance to be in the ring. And, before that, I had played football. My senior year ended. And that October of 96, Key was at my house, and my mom came home. There was a parade on one of the streets not too far from, literally 4 blocks away from my house. There was a wrestling ring. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a wrestler named Mike Cruel. He ended up in the WWE for a hot second. He used to team up with, Nunzio, right? Oh, yeah, and they were the FBI and WWE. And his father, along with Tommy D, the guy who discovered Cactus Jack, they had the ring set up. I don't think they had anybody really to work, but they were like, oh, if you want to take a picture in the ring, blah, 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 selling that. And so me and Key ran up there, and we were like, oh, man, we're wrestlers. And we're of age. But I think we were 16 at the time. But, back then, it was a different time. So we were allowed to get 5 minutes in the ring. So we were like, what? So we ran home, got our sweats, our shirts, pads, whatever we could get, tried to look as professional as possible. We had a 5-minute match, and within 2 minutes, there's probably about 5,000 people standing watching us. And they were exploding for everything they were doing. And one of the coolest things were Key goes up to the top, goes for a moonsault. And when he goes, he kicks the street light. So the whole place, oh! So right there, me and Key were like, oh, that's it. We can't beat that. So he pinned me, and they counted on the ring, and we were hooked. We were so hooked. So when fast forward to February later in 97, Louis asked me, and we were both like, yeah, hell yeah, we're down. We're so down. So we go and we train, or not train, but we have these matches. It was the most like backyard thing. The only thing that separated us from backyard was we were inside a building on the third floor. You know what I mean? Inside. But and we had a real ring. But fast forward to I think September of '97, and I kept hearing about Homicide and J Lover, Homicide and J Lover. And back then, me and Key and Mace and Louie were the Hit Squad. That was the origins of the Hit Squad for our side. But back then, Homicide used to have a partner who passed away. His name was Mike Stone. They were the Hit Squad on the Indies in New York. And J Lover was part of the clique, too. And so I kept hearing about Homicide, Homicide, J Lover, Homicide, Hit Squad. There's a real Hit Squad, and there's your Hit Squad. And all right, cool. So Homicide finally is there. And he had trained at this place since he started, but we just never bumped into each other. And first time I see him, I look down. He's wearing these Timbs. And they were covered in blood. So I was like, what's going on with your boots? He's like, oh, I wrestled last night in Bayonne for Jersey All Pro, and I wrestled this guy Flash Wheeler, and I had to handle him, and I kicked him. This is his blood. And I was like, what? Why are you wearing steel toe boots for wrestling, first of all? And why are you kicking people with those steel toe boots? Why is your blood? I thought this would work.
So
like,
many questions.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm green as hell. I don't know anything. I'm like, well, but why? I thought it's a dance. I thought we worked together, And he's like, nah. Sometimes you just got beat up a dude. And I'm just like, okay. So then, I think it was January of maybe it might have been a little bit earlier than that. But me and Key ended up wrestling Homicide and J Lover, Hit Squad versus Hit Squad, and we had a good match. And Homicide's like, I want to train you guys. I want to keep this, going with the Hit Squad or whatever. And so we were training with him, and then Bobby Lombardi later on, I want to say it was 98, later 98, opened up the Doghouse Wrestling Academy, which is where we all were. I mean, we were living there practically. We went to JAP eventually, but the Doghouse is really where everything started, LIWF Doghouse, and that's where we spent most of our time training. And then, maybe about 99-ish. I mean, we were already going to JAP to watch Homicide wrestle and do shows, but like they had started their school, so we would go there when we weren't at LIWF. And, that's where we met the Haas brothers and Dixie and Dragon and all those guys. But Fat Frank was really the one who, like, this was where we decided, all right, this is where we're going to do this for sure, and it was because of the JAP school. But we were still going to Doghouse and running things, you know what I mean?
Fat Frank's one of those polarizing characters in that New Jersey range of wrestling.
Very much so.
He's on my list. The confusing history between, like, when you look at Jersey All Pro and you look at Jersey Championship Wrestling, they did a lot of this throughout the history of the promotions, and then when they evolve into GCW, let's just kind of let's just hop in right there. Then let's start with Jersey All Pro. You spent a ton of time there with your career. For years, and then you'd work other places, but it seemed kind of like a home base for you a little while. You held those tag titles 7 times individually, I believe, and 6 with Mafia as the Hit Squad.
Yes.
What does Jersey All Pro specifically mean to you, having spent as much time as you did in that locker room?
Jersey All Pro Wrestling is where I learned to become a professional wrestler. I trained in wrestling at the Doghouse, but learning the business, learning the acumen of a pro wrestler took place at JAP. I got to come across a lot of ECW talent, current, because the company was still running, and some WWE talent eventually. But JAP was where I learned what it meant to be a pro wrestler, because Maf and I, once we started teaming up, nothing was given to us. Nothing was easy. It was always a challenge. And somehow, I don't know, we just had chemistry from day one. So because of that chemistry, people were taking notice. You got these big, bald Hispanic dudes doing all these crazy moves, but getting the crowd to hate them and love them at the same time. And what we were doing was we were taking the guys like Dixie and Dragon, the smaller guys, Derange, Ghost Shadow, and elevating them with us and taking them on the ride, which is what a lot of pros did, which we didn't even know because, we were just learning all this. We're still just as green as them. But we were changing things, I was talking to someone today and, my whole life, if I ever said I wanted to do something, if I was motivated, I would move mountains to make it happen. And I always said I wanted to go to Japan to wrestle because I always loved Japan. And in the first 5 years, we made that happen. And it was because of all the hard work that we did. And we changed the entire Northeast between Homicide, Low-Ki, Maf, myself, SAT, Amazing Red, Quiet Storm, Chris Divine, Derange, Ghost Shadow. I mean, you name everybody who's a New York indie guy or legend or whatever you want to call us. We all were together. And there's a reason why that whole group came up together, and it's still, we're still revered by a lot of the fans that witnessed it, and you could add Mark and Jay because they were coming up, the Briscoes, they came up the same time as us and they held it down in Ring of Honor, and, just a bunch of guys, Jay Lethal was another one that, he's still doing his thing today and he looks like he's in his late 20s, you know what I mean?
$1 million on the screen.
Yeah.
He looks great.
Yeah. So, yeah, and we all came up together, and like I said, we all learned how to become professional wrestlers together. And so with Jersey All Pro, that was where a lot of the things happened. I also can't really not show love to Frank Goodman's USA Pro in New York, as well as Jack Sabbath's ICW, which is another company that's still going today.
ICW's regular shows all the time.
Yep. And, DeMonto's doing his thing over there with them. But the beginning of ICW, it was the Hit Squad show. Hit Squad, Low-Ki. We were the three. Homicide would get his burn, but, it was a lot of people were afraid to use him because they kept hearing these crazy stories about him, which most weren't true. Some might have been.
There's a little bit of truth.
But, the Hit Squad and Low-Ki show was really what took over New York, because you put the three of us in, you knew it was business. It was grown man business, because, we talk about a lot today that it feels like it's a kid environment. And I don't mean to demean them, the wrestlers. It's just, it doesn't feel like how it felt back then. Back then, you were swimming with sharks every time you got on a show. And now it's like, it really has become more of a Broadway play to me rather than an athletic competition. And there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy, when you tell a good story, I enjoy it. But I'm just saying, for us back then, you had to kill or be killed. And, there's not that killer instinct like that now. I don't feel it anyway, but, but that was because when we came in, like I said, we changed everything. Everything was made different because we showed up, showed out. And it was the same thing everywhere we went. So because JCW was in the same vicinity, North Jersey or whatever, Ricky O, who I still talk to this day, he saw a lot of good investment in us. And he put a lot of, if you see, the first few champions were the Hit Squad, Low-Ki, Haas Brothers, a lot of JP crossover. Homicide got a little burn in JCW too. And it got to a point where the guys from the Midwest, like CM Punk and Colt Cabana, they were coming to Jersey because of the stuff that they heard that we were doing. They were like the same thing for their area that we were for ours. It's just, 1,000 miles in between. You know what I mean? So, matter of fact, one of the things that CM Punk told me the first time we ever met was, I want to work the Hit Squad one day. And it never happened. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. He's kind of a big deal now. But, every time I see him, though, it's always love from him, because he would get the tapes and watch us. And, I know people don't understand what it was like But back then, there was no social media, there was no YouTube. You had to earn that word of mouth from the fans. They were tape trading, buying RF and buying George Mayfield and, guys like that who were selling the tapes. And it was all word of mouth. And that crossover with JCW, it provided those fans like, oh, now we could go see his squad and Low-Ki at JP and JCW, and it's not that far, and that was Ricky O really like, he did a lot for us. He doesn't get a lot of praise that he should, but he did a lot for the Hit Squad, especially, a lot of the time, if we had any big event, it was from JCW because Ricky O helped co-promote, and he's still to this day. I mean, I did his podcast like late last year, and he was still promoting the Hit Squad like crazy. You know what I mean? So still a lot of love there.
When you look at when you talk about like a GCW now, it's kind of all in the same realm of where we're at in our timeline now. The cult-like fandom that follows GCW around, do you feel like what you and Homicide and Key and Mafia were doing in that late 90s push is where the birthplace of that cult-like fandom, it all came from that ECW, that Philadelphia, New Jersey, that chunk of that Northeast area? Is that where that like cult-like fandom you think started for what we see now with your GCWs and stuff?
It's so insane that you're asking me this afternoon on my drive home. I was on the phone with Homicide, and we talked about that and how GCW is ECW continued because of the fans and how, the fans are rabid for GCW no matter what, and it's crazy that you brought that up because we literally talked about that this afternoon, that Philly area. If you ever watched like the old WCW pay-per-views and the WWE pay-per-views, they always had to take it a different approach when they had those in Philly because those fans were so smart and passionate and dedicated. And they didn't want to see garbage wrestling. They wanted to see good wrestling, good fights. That's really what they wanted to see. They didn't care about, fancy moves. They loved Cactus Jack and Max Payne versus the Nasties. You know what I'm saying? They loved Kevin Sullivan. They loved Terry Funk. For a reason, because those are the guys that brought that realism, that real fight. So as they continued on, they showed their kids what they loved, and their kids loved it. I mean, if you look at Philly is not an easy place to grow up in. You have to fight for everything. I mean, New York is tough. It has Harlem and stuff. There's some areas in New York that's not that bad. In Philly, there's really very few good areas where, outside of Philly, sure, like the Chester area, and certain parts of Chester, not all of it, but, but in Philly, it's such a tough blue collar town, and they want to see their fights. They want their relief from their everyday life. And if you give them a good fight, they're going to love you forever. If you give them a show, not so much. They want to see that. They want to hear that chop, and they want to feel that punch. And Moff used to hate wrestling in Philly, but I think he secretly loved it because it was a challenge. You had to put on a good show every time you worked in Philly, especially the arena. So I feel like that is what the legacy, ECW's legacy, is being carried on by GCW through the fans, which sounds crazy, but the ultimately wrestling is about the fans. We could want to fight in an empty arena and nobody's going to pay to see that, but if you have good fans that want to see a fight and that are in it the whole time, watch a company like GCW because those fans are insane everywhere. And it's not just Jersey and Philly, it's California, it's Detroit, it's, wherever else, Texas. Everywhere they go, the fans are crazy for GCW. It is kind of crazy for me to be a part of the history. I was the first GCW to switch from JCW to GCW. I was the first tag team champ between me and Kyle the Beast and me and Moff, whichever one you want to consider the first, B Squad or Hit Squad. I was part of that, and I have a lot of history with JCW before that, so it's crazy for me that like Ring of Honor, GCW, JAP, USA Pro, ICW. I have history with all those companies and massive history, not just like a little past. Like a lot of things happened because I was there for the beginning up until, they went to the next level, so it is crazy for me to see, but I'm also proud of it. I want to make my push now, and I'm going to use your platform. I want to induct Louis into the Hall of Fame when he goes into Deathmatch Hall of Fame on June 3rd. So Brett Lauderdale, please, whoever is watching this, Brett, hit me up so I can induct Louis. Please. Thank you.
I'm going to clip that and make sure it gets put out into the universe. We're kind of bouncing all over the place, and I love it because you brought up that shift over. I like it when I have a guest on that makes my segues easy, because you talked about GCW and what the indie monster they've became. You were there during the changeover, during the buyout. You worked for JCW, throughout multiple ownerships, kind of throughout the transition of what they were going through. So let's start with the transition from Jersey Championship into Game Changer from the perspective of somebody who was in the locker room when it was happening. What was that like for you guys?
So they originally, the owner of Game Changer World in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, he came in, he was in the locker room a lot. He was a cool dude. And, Ricky was still coming around. And, it was, like I said, for me, I grew up with Ricky, so I'd known him at that point, maybe 15 years, give or take 10 years, whatever it was. So, I always looked at him as, all right, what are we doing tonight? And then I noticed DeMonto had started to become more of the locker room leader as far as what was going on. So I never questioned it because DeMonto and I, up to that point, we always had a good relationship, and it was just, all right, just tell me what you need me to do, what you want, whatever. I never really was too political because you either wanted to use me or you didn't. It didn't matter to me, you know what I mean? And then I noticed that it became GCW, and I was like, weren't we just Jersey Championship Wrestling last week? And it was like, well, yeah, it got bought, and Ricky's out, and now we're going to do this. But what was going on also, we were doing more bigger shows. I don't want to say more. We were doing bigger shows. We had a show that was at an outdoor festival, and they had Slash from Guns N' Roses and Stone Temple Pilots performing on the stage 10 feet away from us. And we were all sharing the same locker room. I remember Janela telling me, oh, I was hanging out with Slash. He was pretty cool. You know what I mean? I was like, what? So I noticed that we were doing more stuff. And that was because of the investment from Game Changer World into JCW. And that's why it became GCW. When we did the skate and surf in Asbury Park, the one, I don't know if you remember the clip where I think Janela jumps off the porta potties and then the door opens and there's Jake the Snake, right? And it was one of the wackiest things ever. And that was going on with the Switch, and that was being brought to you by Game Changer World. So ultimately, I feel like the transition really took place when Janela and Zandig did that massive bump off the roof. And I feel like that's where it went from being JCW to totally Game Changer, GCW, and that was where they took that line in the sand and they stepped over it, and they became, the Deathmatch Kings and, more harder style than what JCW used to bring. And, for me, it was just I was starting to see more and more deathmatch stuff, so I was kind of used to it. But it's not my style, but it is a style that a lot of people like. So, you got to give your fans what they want. You got to cater. And that's what they did. And, it went on from there. That's where I got off the train, and that's where the train kept going. And, but again, even with that, now they've evolved where they're doing less deathmatch stuff and doing stuff Cardona and his storyline, more entertainment based. So, it just, for me, it's that there's several stages of GCW. I just got off stage 2. You know what I'm saying?
I like hearing those stories though, because you don't get a lot of that from your guys' perspective. You know, a lot of times as a young fan, you look at what you were reading about in that 2014, 2015 thing in the dirt sheets and on the message boards. It was just, you know, JCW got bought out, now it's GCW, and then the train kept rolling. I like
Yep.
hearing those stories from your perspective. One of the ones that I'm curious about is you and the guys, Mafia and all the boys again. Everybody that came through, we'll just call it the collective, your locker room, you and your guys. What was it like now taking a step back 25 years later and seeing the guys, just the plethora of list of who y'all have worked with coming through your territory then, and the doors you helped open and the guys you helped get over to become people like Jay and Mark Briscoe, who started cutting their teeth with you guys early in their careers.
Um, it's not until maybe about 10 years in that I started to realize, like, man, I've affected a lot of bigger names' careers. And the only reason why I even noticed it is because I had an injury, and you start to look inside, internal, and you reflect upon like what you've done has been worth it, and is it even worth keep going? And then I looked, and like you said, Jay Lethal, the Briscoes, SAT, even like a Samoa Joe that I met before he blew up, and Brian Danielson before he blew up. Guys like Paul London and Spanky, Hernandez, and then like I start looking at the guys that I'm at that time was currently wrestling in like EYFBO, Santana Ortiz, and like all these other guys, and you're like, man, like, because like Homicide was yelling at me today about it. I don't see myself as anything special. I just see myself as just a guy who gets to wrestle every once in a while, have fun, and do my thing. But like every once in a while, I get reminded of like the cool, great stuff that I've done, and the people that I've gotten in the ring with, and it's like, man, I really have done a lot to change this business. Like, not only did I do it with my work in the ring, but my work outside the ring. And that's something that, like, when I got inducted into the Jersey All Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, I talked about. I wanted to make sure that this business, when I'm gone, is in a way better place. I still want to enjoy wrestling when I'm not wrestling anymore. And part of my deal is to help out the younger guys and show them, and the girls too, because I've helped out a bunch of the current crop of girls on the indies and giving them advice. And I do my best to make sure that they're comfortable and they can come to me for advice. Because not everybody's like that. A lot of them are like, hey, what's up, mama? And it's like, bro, it's not about that. They're here to wrestle. So respect that, and I try my best to make them feel as comfortable and give them honest advice. If someone sucks, obviously I'm not going to tell them they suck. I'm going to tell them, like, you need to work on these things. And then you could see and experiment and whatever. But, I always try my best to be honest and open, because no matter what, if they come to me for advice, they know that they're going to get straight advice. They're not going to get BS, because a lot of wrestlers do that. They do the, yeah, no, it was good, kid. It was good. It was good. Yeah, keep it up. Just keep doing what you're doing. And they didn't even watch. If I didn't watch, I'm going to let you know, no, I was over here doing this, or I was over there doing that. I saw this. This looked good. I didn't see the rest, though. And they always know that if they want to send me the match on video, I'll critique it for them, give them advice, see if I see anything good or bad, and let them know. And that's just something that I always am willing to do. And, I've done that since the days of, being in there with Special K, and, being in there with the SAT and Red. And, like, it's funny, we talk about Red all the time, because Red, for as small as he was one of the heaviest guys ever. Like, you would never think he's a fat ass, but he totally is. So that's one of the things that, like, I'll always think about is, trying to press slam Red, and he's like, nope, not going. You know what I mean? And, just stuff like that. And then, like, the other thing for me is too, like, a lot of the bigger guys come up to me and They tell me how much I influence them because, like, I'll do a run or I do the splash or whatever it is, that I'm doing that big men aren't supposed to do. To me, I'm 5'9" on my best day, and I've been anywhere between 260 and 290. I've been up as high as 330, but I really didn't wrestle that much when I was 330. But a lot of these bigger guys all tell me how much of an influence I had on them. And like, I take that very serious because, I want to make sure that big men are dominant when they wrestle and people are afraid of them and they tell a good story and they're interested in them because that's something that I help to keep alive. I learned from guys like Bam Bam Bigelow. He taught me a lot when we would do shows, whether it was JP or USA Pro or wherever. He would always give advice. And the Wild Samoans, especially Samu. Samu always gave me advice, and Fatu as well. And like all those guys, entrusted me a lot of their knowledge. So I do my best to pass it on and make sure that this business stays good. So, I take that very serious. A lot of the younger talent that are now stars that I had a chance to help because, it's me letting myself know I'm doing a good job. You know what I mean? I know that sounds a little weird, but
No, I get it. Like, as weird as it sounds, I get it. This is it may be a kind of a loaded question. You hear a lot of guys say, like, if you're coming up in the business, you go up to the vets, you shake their hand, you ask them for advice, you get them to watch your tape, whatever you can do to be better. In the cooking world, you do the same thing. When I was a chef, I would want my line cooks to come up to me, Chef, what can I do to be better? How can I do this? So when you get to that point in your career and you have the guys start coming up to you, this is where it might be a little bit of a loaded question. How important is it for the vet when the green guys are coming up and they're going, how important is it for the vet to be receptive? Because a lot of times you hear the green guys going up and going, hey, will you do this? Do this. From the vet's perspective, though, now, as long as you've been in the career and as many careers as you helped, how important is it for the vet to be receptive of these green guys?
Well, I definitely have a lot of pride in being one of the vets that everybody can turn to. If you don't approach things with an open mind, because the business is always evolving, and there's something Homicide and I talk about a lot, and this is why Homicide's one of the better agents down at NWA, because you have to keep an open mind. This isn't the same wrestling from the 90s. This isn't the same wrestling from the early 2000s or 2010s. This is a different form of entertainment now. And you have to be able to accept that while you may not love everything about today's wrestling, these guys are still busting their ass and putting on a show so that, people can be entertained in the vein of what you were doing when you were their age. And I always try my best to listen first as much as possible. If I see that there's something, a flaw, I'll pause, correct yourself, whatever, let you know, like, all right, but you're thinking this way, it really got to be this way. You know what I mean? But even with that, you have to explain and you have to give them time to talk and respond. Because if you just say whatever, you never give them time to respond, it's never going to sink in, and they're never going to apply it to whatever it is that you were talking about. And, I've seen a lot of rookies where you talk to them and you don't explain, you're just talking at them, and they continue to do the behavior that you were talking to them about, and nothing gets changed. And, that's not good. You have to be able to, explain to them, listen to them, talk to them, and be open-minded. And a lot of vets aren't comfortable with being open-minded because they feel as though whatever it is, that they came up an old school way, or they came up, a way where it was more selfish. So you're not going to be as receptive. You're not going to be as willing to give that advice to help them get better. And like I said, because I want to watch this when I'm not in the ring anymore, I want them to be better. I want them to have great matches so that when I'm watching, I can feel like, oh man, that was awesome. You know what I mean? And I don't think a lot of wrestlers, vets, think that way. I think they are just like, there's some that are like, they give advice and it's just so that way whoever they gave advice to. Oh man, so and so told me this, and I'm like his student now, and they know that that kid is gonna say whatever to put them over. Me, I don't care if anybody ever tells anybody that I talked to them or not. I just want them to be better wrestlers in the ring. That's it, and be safe, because obviously as things have changed, they're putting their bodies more on the line, and they don't really need to. But part of that was starting with my generation and the generation after, doing more of the head bumps and the crazy, bumps on the floor. And, in a way, I feel responsible, sort of. But, I want to make sure that they're doing the right thing and learn to, if you're going to do something crazy, make sure it's worth it. Otherwise, don't do it, and, a lot of kids are taking chances now, and it's kind of scary because, I saw something not too long ago where Mickey Knuckles, she went to hit someone with a light tube and she had a giant gash in her leg. She's a veteran. There's no need for that. You know what I mean? She didn't need to cut herself up like that. And, she missed out on another payday or whatever it was, and she's got this nasty scar in her leg now. Who knows? Maybe she nicks an artery. Maybe she, cuts a tendon and she can't walk again, or she has to lose her leg, or maybe even worse. I always worry about stuff like that because, I don't want to see anybody really get hurt. I really don't. I want to see people do this, survive, and then tell the story, later on in life. Tell their kids, their grandkids, whatever. Oh, I did this one time. It was pretty cool. You know what I mean? Like, trust me, if, just imagine if, Macho Man Randy Savage was alive today and had grandkids, the stories he would tell his kids. You know what I mean? That's how I think of it.
One more stop along the train of nostalgia and the history of Steve Mack. You were there day one, night one of what many would grow to call, the king of the indies. And that was with Ring of Honor. You were there on night one, day one on the card. What was it like going into that first show with Ring of Honor? Because it was so many of the core group of guys you'd been talking about. So we're going back to 2002 now. But now at this point, you go in that 96, 97 range to 02, you're 5 years in. You guys, you've had the crew together for a little while. And now you got this upstart promotion like Ring of Honor. What was that like?
So, again, we would see Rob Feinstein and Doug Gentry at shows because they would film. And I had known them from the ECW days before I even started wrestling. And, Doug was someone that I had a close relationship with because we both loved Japanese wrestling. I could talk to him about anything back then. And, we had similar minds, and we always had fun too. And so as they're going to all these shows, USA Pro, ICW, JAP, JCW, whatever, and they're filming, Rob tells us after ECW closes that he's thinking about running a company. So we're like, yeah, sure. Let us know what's up. So eventually the idea of Ring of Honor comes to fruition, and we always joke about it between us, Low-Ki, and the SAT. SAT want to say that they were the first to sign, but I think we were the first announcement to sign with Ring of Honor. And but regardless of whoever it was, the core group, they would watch us every week and they loved us. And back then, when RF would put out a tape, he would put a bunch of clips at the end of whatever the show was of whatever indie talent they had been filming. So we were on a lot of those, that was when we were doing stuff like The Wall and Bayonne and, hitting the figure four frog splash. And Moff was hitting the burning hammer and, the cannonball and stuff like that. And, he gave us a lot of exposure because a lot of people were buying RF tapes. And, so we kind of had a little bit of a swell where people were talking about it. And then finally they set the date for February and we were all excited. And then he tells me and Moff that we were going to start the company. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, they gave us the idea for the promo where we meet the people on the bus. And then we were going to open up the show with Christopher Street Connection, our boys, and that was the dopest thing ever. But as dope as it was, I never get nervous for matches. I don't get that butterfly feeling like a lot of people do. But I will tell you that when our cue was hit for us to come out, it was me first, then Moff, and I opened up the curtain. It was one of the first times ever, few times, where I opened up the curtain and it felt like the whole world was on top of us as we were coming out. And I stopped for a second, like, oh. And you just felt, because that building, it was so small, so hot all the time, no matter what. It was never cold in that building. And they were just packed. And we had ran there before with Jersey All Pro, so we knew what that building felt like. So it wasn't like the first time we were there. But with Ring of Honor, everybody was there, and they knew something was going to happen. As soon as they saw the curtain open, they went nuts. We came out. We did our thing with our boys. And it was up to me and Moff to lay the groundwork for what Ring of Honor was going to be at that time, which was going to be, it was supposed to be serious, respect, honor, discipline, handshakes before and after the matches, no gimmicks, even though obviously there's a lot of gimmicks. But it was supposed to be all about proper competitive wrestling. And we were the ones that set the tone. We set the history for the company. And, obviously over the years, they've tried several times to delete that from the first show, which kind of bothers me because, hey, listen, nothing's perfect. Obviously commentating was a little crazy, but at the time it was very much, free range. You could say whatever you wanted to say and it didn't bother anybody. There wasn't, people who were offended as easily. So you could say whatever. And Christopher Street Connection being a gay tag team, obviously some gay remarks were brought out. So the company tried to squash that. Could have just censored it out, but, they tried to just eliminate it. And, a lot of times they try to say that Jay and Red were the first match. And while they were the first match that was booked, Hit Squad and Christopher Street Connection was a 3 count. And it was the first match ever. So I always have to deal with that inner, fighting of, we did that. It was awesome. But they try to take that away from us. And, it sucks. But at the same time, I'm proud of it because we did start the company. Now it's going on to, whatever it's going on to with AEW and Tony Khan. But like when I met Tony Khan at Jay Briscoe's funeral, Tony Khan shook my hand and he was like, "Oh, Hit Squad, I remember you guys." And that's kind of cool. I mean, the dude's got money. You know what I'm saying? Probably the richest guy I've ever shook his hand. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like, that's cool. But it just it was definitely one of the special nights of my career because we started something that's still going on. Like I said, it's hard for me to talk about myself like that because I'm very I'm down on myself a lot. Like I'm my worst critic. I put a post out today of me doing a splash off the top rope at JAP while they were filming The Wrestler. And this is a dope ass splash. I hit the splash. I bounced up, landed on my feet. But I could never let myself enjoy the cool stuff that I've done because I'm like, look at me. I look like crap. You know what I mean? Or like, I just hate certain things. And it's hard to be your own worst critic like that because, but that's our whole group. We're all like that. Me, Homicide, Key, and Moff. So that's why kind of we're attracted to each other because we're the same way. But, there's that inner turmoil of like, I did that and that was something dope. But then like, I have to deal with the aftermath of, we're going to take this away from you. And it's like, but why? But yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of the craziest nights because there was so much pressure, especially for the main event. Low-Ki, Dragon, and Daniels. We knew that they had to deliver, and Key's our boy, so no matter what, we had his back, and we were there for that as well. And Homicide and his match, and Boogaloo, they were teaming up, and like there was a lot of pushing everybody like to succeed, and that's where the brotherhood comes in to this day, we still, like, whenever I see the SAT, I push them to be better, and they do the same for me. And Homicide, like I told you, we talk, and even Mafia, like, we still joke around about certain things, and it's been 26 years, and it's like if we're still in high school, kind of, if that makes sense.
This has been one of my favorite questions I've started to ask recently, and this conversation has been absolutely phenomenal. So I know the answer that you're going to give me is going to blow my mind. If you take everything that you've learned over the last 2 decades and a half, you go back to night one and you look at rookie Steve, like, what advice do you give that man? Looking back at who you were 25 years ago, what do you tell that man that night? Like, what advice do you give him?
I know it's crazy because back then I was swimming with sharks and I had all the confidence in the world, and you couldn't tell me anything. I believed in the hit squad. I believe in Monsta Mack. I believe in everything that I did. And I believe that we were top tier. Could we have been better? Yeah, of course. There's always room for improvement, no matter how old you've been doing, how long you've been doing this. But I felt like we were at the top of the game, and I felt like my confidence was pretty high back then. If I could talk to myself back then, I would tell myself to stay confident, to believe in yourself, because it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. There's going to be times you're going to feel like you're by yourself, and you do have support. You just don't see it like other people have the support out there. And that was part of my downfall, was I didn't believe in myself. Like, I literally, to 5 minutes ago, my self-perception is, I'm just a fat guy from Brooklyn. And I say that in every interview because that's just what I believe. I've been lucky enough, fortunate enough to travel the world. Like, I use this analogy a lot too. Let's say there's 8 billion people around the world. Out of that, maybe 200,000 of them are professional wrestlers. That's not even a percent, not even 0.5% of the population of the world. Yet, how many of us all know what it's like to stand on the top rope versus the rest of the world? We are given such a great gift to entertain and do what we love and be physical and be entertaining and be artful and creative. And, we're giving that spotlight where so many people don't have that ability. Maybe they can draw, maybe they could write a book, or, host a YouTube series or whatever it is that they do. But with pro wrestling, most of us grew up watching pro wrestling and loving it. And we're able to be in the ring with our idols, our heroes, and become their peers eventually if we're good enough. And we get to do it all in front of the world with them cheering us. How many teachers know what it's like? Teachers who do important jobs. How many of them know what it's like to be cheered or clapped for or hear their name chanted? But we all do, whether we want them to boo us or cheer us. And we have that ability to make that happen on a weekly basis. So I never saw it like that until I was older. And if I could tell myself, when I was younger, stay confident, stay focused. Don't let anyone or anything stop you from doing what you want to do. My biggest realization of that was when I got to work for WWE in 2019, 2018, whatever year it was. 20 years in the game, and that was my first time ever working for WWE. And I got to do it 3 times. Like, they called me back a bunch of times for a bunch of dates, and then COVID happened. But I ended up working 3 dates, 1 in Brooklyn. My last one was in Brooklyn. If I never worked for WWE again, ever, I worked a show in Brooklyn. I did work with the WWE in Brooklyn, in my hometown, blocks away from where, I used to go visit my grandfather or go shopping for school clothes, all in that same area where the Barclays is. It's not Madison Square Garden. Originally, that's what I was trying to do. I reached out because I wanted to work the Madison Square Garden show. It didn't happen, but that's all right because I got to do Brooklyn, I got to do Philly, and I got to do Massachusetts, Boston. Like, And I got to do it with some people that I know, like Sean Bennett, the referee, Eddie Arango, the other referee for Raw, and a bunch of other guys, Samoa Joe, and guys that like I had worked with on the Indies, and like it was kind of cool. You know what I mean? I got to hang out with a lot of guys that I worked in Beyond with. They were all on NXT. That they were doing the NXT crossover for Survivor Series. And they were all there, and they all popped to see me, and like that was cool as hell. You know what I mean? But that moment of this was awesome. I really should have been here a long time ago. That hit hard, especially after Brooklyn. I didn't know it was going to be the last time, for now that I worked for WWE, but it hit hard because it was in my hometown. It was big. It was huge. When I go up to Boston, doing the stupid conga line. I have a blue wig on, glasses. How do you even know that it's me, right? But as we're running around, there's a Hit Squad chant. And I was like, what? This is crazy. I think it was Vicious. It might not have been Vicious Vicky. It might have been Delmy and her partner. They kind of popped that there was a Hit Squad chant. Now, I'm in Boston, not even close to my hometown, but because of all the love I got from the fans that go to Beyond, that's what I got from Boston, and that's one of the biggest deals ever for me. They chanted Hit Squad at a WWE event I wasn't even wrestling. I was just being a fool, dancing around the ring. You know what I mean? And like, how could you ever beat that? But like I said, at the same time, for me, it was, I should have been here a long time ago. I should have been a part of this for over a decade now. And I let my confidence destroy everything. It sucks. But I'm helping out now where, I get to work with Titan Championship Wrestling. I know it's a little fast forward, but I'm working with Titan Championship Wrestling behind the scenes, practically doing everything, whether it's producing, booking, agenting, promos, whatever it is. I'm wrestling as well. I'm the tag champ. I'm doing everything that I can for this company to help out all the younger generation indie guys and girls. And I love this job. It's my favorite thing I've done in wrestling pretty much. It's become my second home after JAP closed. And I got to thank Billy and Charlie because they gave me that opportunity. But doing that WWE stuff, it lit that fire under me to be better at Titan and what I do there. So, it really comes down, like I said, the confidence. That's really what I would have told myself. Just keep your self-confidence up. You can do anything. And, who knows? Maybe there'll be a time machine invented before I die.
All right, Steve. I can't let you off the hook. I always close these the same way every time. I've got 5 random questions coming up. Mm-hmm. Only one of yours has to do with wrestling. Only one of them. But okay. I've got them ready. All right? Mm-hmm. Number 1. What's your favorite venue you've ever had a chance to wrestle in?
So I wrestled in Korakuen Hall in Japan, which was amazing. It was our very first show in Japan, and we were on pay-per-view there, and like it's hard to top that because of so many shows. New Japan, All Japan, 01, everything. That's international. But domestic is FET music venue up in Providence, Rhode Island for Beyond. Every time we wrestled in FET, it didn't matter who we were wrestling against. It was a big fight feel for us because the fans are right on the ring. You could feel everything. You could feel their eyes. You could feel, them breathing. You could hear their conversations. You can pick up every little thing that's going on with the fans, and their energy is so live and so lit because they're on the ring. And then you have the fans on the balcony and they're looking down, and you have the commentators that you could hear the commentators, and everything about FET is just phenomenal for me. It's my favorite venue in the States by far. And believe me, it's an honor to wrestle at like the ECW arena because, the history there, and, some of the other venues I've been fortunate enough to wrestle in that are big name venues, but FET is the spot that I'll always, like when I close my eyes and I want to see the perfect wrestling match of Monsta Mack, it's FET.
Question number 2. What's your favorite movie?
It's kind of, I always do, rather than do one, I do three. Goodfellas, Godfather, and Lost Boys. And then if you want to go for the sub for any of those, Top Gun, the first Top Gun.
All solid picks. All right.
Yes.
Question 3, completely random. Do you think a hot dog is a sandwich?
So technically it is, because it's bread, meat, bread. And what makes it, it's kind of like, is a peninsula an island? Because it's surrounded mostly by water, with the one side just barely not, not having any water. But yeah, I think it's a sandwich.
Question 4. Do you believe in aliens?
Yes, full force. So when I was a kid in Puerto Rico, my mom, my stepfather, and my sister and I, we were driving around, and there was some sort of weird nonsense that happened. And there's a lot of alien activity talk in Puerto Rico. So, but, we didn't think anything of it. And we were driving, and all of a sudden the road went from being a regular paved road to rocks. And there was actually houses with driveways. And we're like, how the hell are they driving, And we just kept, all these weird things kept happening. And next thing I know, now for us, it was like an hour. But in time, it went from being 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night. And we don't know what happened. So it's one of those weird things that you definitely, and growing up in Brooklyn, I have seen what a lot of people would call a UFO, like flying over the Verrazano Bridge. There was a thing that had like the ET lights, how it rotates around, and definitely seen that. And just all kinds of weird things. Living at one point, I was living in Staten Island. There's definitely a lot of weird activity going on in Staten Island. I'm sure any of my guys like TJ Marconi or Chris Dickinson can answer. There's a lot of random weirdness happening in Staten Island. So definitely aliens exist.
Number 5. What's your favorite video game?
So Street Fighter always takes the top. Street Fighter 2. I have it on practically every platform it ever came out for on the home console. And to be honest, the closest game after that would be any of the Gran Turismo series, because I've always loved racing since I was a kid. I loved Outrun. I love Pole Position. So racing has always been, like, I really wanted to be either a jet fighter or a race car driver, but the fact that God made me this short, stout, fat Hispanic man made it kind of hard to get into a race car and push it as hard as you can. But Street Fighter is definitely the tops. Anybody who knows me, I mean, my wallpaper on my computer right now is Street Fighter, and my logo is based off the Street Fighter logo. So...
All right, Steve, this is everybody's favorite part of the episode because I don't have to say anything. Give you a chance. Put yourself over. Tell everybody what's coming down the pipes. The Demon Saints got First Class coming up, Titan Championship Wrestling. Put yourself over. Tell everybody what's coming down. So
right now, I'm in the middle of 2 championship reigns. One for Titan Championship Wrestling, where Black G's and Joker, we've been doing the Freebird rule as the Demon Saints / Tri-State Saints. And... this is the return of Joker. He got injured last year during a Catalyst wrestling show, and this is his first match back in, I believe it's like 7 months, give or take. And legit, when I asked him if he wanted to come back, he said, I am looking forward to power bombing someone into the afterlife. I love Joker. He's the man. You know what I'm saying? He legit said that, and I was just, all right, it's on, let's go. So we have First Class. Also for Titan, there's a lot of big events coming. They just announced their debut in North Carolina this August. They're co-promoting with the museum down in Ellerbe, North Carolina, that has a lot of Andre the Giant stuff because he was living in Ellerbe. And from what I understand, there's a lot of TV talent that's going to be a part of that event with us. That's in August. But May 20th, Titan is running in what is the Highline Arena, which used to be the Tab Ramos Center, if I'm not mistaken, which was a venue that Jersey All Pro ran. And this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I've been doing my best to make this as big a show as possible. I want to have a certain number there, and I want to make sure that we get that possible. We have on the show Homicide versus one of the biggest upstart indie guys, PJ Savage.
I know PJ, big fan of PJ. He's a alumni of the show.
PJ is definitely awesome. He's definitely the future of this business. He's a great guy, and we wrestled once. We had a great match. This is going to be a huge test and a huge honor for PJ to wrestle Homicide, because he looked up to Homicide being the king of New York, and PJ trying to be the next king of New York.
Mm-hmm. Johnny Rod school and all of that, like,
yes, sir.
Overlapping, yeah.
Yes, sir. A lot of connections there, and so what I'm also trying to do is invite some of the old JP guys to come through and hang out, and possibly have like maybe a little mini JP reunion during the show. But I'm not sure who's going to be there exactly yet. But I do know that that's going to be the big match of the night. Also, they have Ultimo Dragon on that show, May 20th, along with Ernest the Cat Miller, who I'm actually looking very much forward to seeing and talking to. Sonny Ono is a part of the show. So there's a lot of big things coming up. And this show on this weekend on the 29th and the May 20th show are like launching pads for, launching points for Titan and moving on to the next level. After that, on May 21st, we're doing a Catalyst Wrestling TV taping, I believe, where we're taking on, it'll be me and Dominic De Niro, I believe, taking on the Ugly Ducklings, Rob Killjoy, and former Gymnasty, White Mike. Used to be the partner with the Infinite Man, Tim. And they were a pretty dope tag team. But I got to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to slapping the hell out of a few people during that match. It's one of my few things that I get a lot of enjoyment from. Outside of that, I really not doing much. I'm looking to venture into podcasting later on this year. And that'll be all over my Twitter, at Steve Mack DHS on Twitter. But that's going to probably be a little later on, probably late summer. I spoke to someone that I want to be on as my first guest. It'll be kind of big if it happens. And but we're not going to do like a traditional podcast. We're going to do something a little different. And outside of that, eventually make my first video game within the next 5 to 10 years. That's like the big thing that I'm looking forward to.
Man, this has been amazing, Steve. I'm really grateful that you gave me a little bit of your time tonight and you stopped by to chat about some wrestling with me.
No doubt. Thank you for having me. It's been an awesome conversation.
Excellent. For the Monster Steve Mack, I am the Will Gray. Thanks for stopping by and listening, my people.